Welcome all. So today we're talking exam preparation strategy, tools and techniques. We're going to get a bit more hands-on than I might normally. We're going to talk through some very specific approaches to exam preparation that, while I think effective for dealing with challenges related to test anxiety, ADHD, or PTSD, you'll find they are broadly applicable and useful no matter who you are. And I hope you find a lot of value in the next 2 hours of your time. It will certainly get a bit personal at times because I really want to meet you where you are and help you overcome these challenges so you can prepare for this exam and cross the finish line. And I hope you find some useful material here. So to keep our session orderly here, just keep everything friendly. No selling crypto or NFTs in the comments. You all are great. We never have any problem with that. I will send a follow-up email after this session within a few hours with the video replay and any resource links that I mentioned. So if you forget to write something down, it should be there. If you have a question, you'll have an email from me, and you're more than welcome to just hit reply. Just give me a thumbs up that the audio and video is good, and we will get this show on the road. Good deal. So I think most of you know who I am. If you have discovered me, it's probably been through YouTube or LinkedIn. In my 9 to 5, I'm a VCSO for a regional bank. I provide cyber strategy in regulated industries largely. I spend most of my time in banking, healthcare, and education. So I get to apply everything that I've ever taught you, but last year I helped tens or hundreds of thousands with exams from the CISSP to CCSP, Security Plus. I recently added CISM to my list. And today we're going to go through a special set of exam prep techniques. We'll talk through some of the common things, but I want to cover a new facet of exam preparation, and these are going to be some personal considerations for making sure that your sessions are productive, you're positive, you're keeping your mindset right, that everything's healthy, that this doesn't become a negative, because exam prep can be stressful and it's largely down to our mindset. And it's something we can all overcome with the right techniques to one degree or another. And we'll look at the latest exam prep materials. More importantly, I want to share with you how to use them effectively, and we're going to get a bit more hands-on than I normally do there. I want to share with you a list of key foundational topics. I call them 10 key topics, and I'll give you a link to a session where we'll cover those. And we're going to walk through a strategy for answering difficult questions. I've created a process. I've kind of productized the thought process for answering difficult questions. I've had quite a number of folks come back and say that it worked well for them on exam day. So I'm going to take you through it, and hopefully it works well for you. And put your questions in the chat as we go. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat here. There may be a little lag in some of my answers, but I'll make sure that you have what you need. So let's talk about the ingredients for success. So there's you are the people. There are the tools that you're going to use to prepare, and there are a lot of options out there. And then there are some techniques. So in the past, I've spent a lot of time talking about the tools and how to use them effectively. And that has a certain amount of value. What's different about today is I'm going to focus in at least part of this session a little more on you and how to make sure that you can use these tools and techniques day to day to make sure you're calm, you're confident, you're focused on the right areas, you're clear on your progress, and you're aware of your knowledge gaps that stand between you and readiness. Now, just out of an abundance of caution, I want to just mention I am obviously not a medical professional. So what really ignited my desire for this session was I was visiting some family, and over dinner, one of the neighbors came over. He's a neurologist, and we got to talking about what I do and what he does. And we drifted over into learning techniques, and I talked to him about some of the folks that I encounter as I deliver educational content. And he said, well, I'm a neurologist. I have 40 years of experience uh, treating folks with PTSD and related neurodivergent conditions. So we got to talking about techniques. He put a book in my lap. He said, go read this book. Call me if you have questions. And that led to some very helpful learning and collaboration, and gave me the opportunity to expand my conversation on the techniques that can help folks get through the exam. But I wanted to just make it clear I'm not a medical professional. Nothing I say here should be considered as medical advice. What I am offering here is some guidance on techniques that should prove helpful in exam prep. Naturally, if anything that drifts over into the medical range, you want to go back to your medical professional. Uh, can I name that book? I will share that with you privately for sure. Yeah, so it's specific to PTSD. So I want to talk to you about your mindset, and we're going to do that a couple of different ways. But I want to start with one technique that has proven to work for some folks. So I want you to just imagine two containers, two bins. You've got a negative container and a positive container. And at the end of the day, you're going to encounter many tools, techniques, good and bad experiences as you prepare for this exam. And it's not uncommon that I encounter folks that are just generally speaking down on themselves for a lack of progress and sometimes for just a bad day. And I can say from my own experience, not every day is my best day, my most productive day, my sharpest day. It varies for all of us. So what I will say is as you are encountering experiences, study sessions, tools, techniques, etc., take any negative associations you have about this exam or yourself and your relationship to this exam, and you throw the ugly stuff into the bin and you leave it. That's the easiest, it's the smartest thing you can do. And as you're going along, you're going to have good days. You're going to have a quiz that goes really well. You're going to go through a video session and come away feeling like you're smarter than you were before. Take the small wins. Life is short. Take the wins where you get them. Some days are going to be better than others. Keep looking ahead. Tomorrow is always a chance for a better day. And we really have a choice about how we think about a lot of things. So I want to give you an example here about how just one way you can flip the script by a simple change in how you think about a situation, because it's easy for us to psych ourselves out, to think that we're not ready for the exam, we're never going to be ready. So let's take the scheduling scenario. I mentioned in a LinkedIn post and in an email to you all in the past few weeks here that I would recommend you get pretty close to ready before you schedule that exam. I will bet at least a few people here have already scheduled the exam, and that's okay. So how can we deal with that? So, and one of you on here has had a discussion with me, and you know who you are. And that deadline that's looming out there, that exam day, looks like a threat, right? It looks like this roadblock that we're going to just run into because we are not ready. And that is certainly one way of looking at it. People who like to take exams, they will sometimes schedule an exam before they're ready just because it forces them to study. It's how they keep from procrastinating. So the other way you can look at this is that my exam date's going to push me to study, but I can always reschedule if I'm not ready. And that is the fact of the matter. It costs $50 to reschedule, but $50 is a lot less than the full exam fee, isn't it? So if you get, I would say 7 days out, and it doesn't look like you are ready, and we'll talk a little more about how you determine if you're ready as we go along here. If you're a week out and it doesn't look like you're ready, push it out. And I would say when you're pushing that exam out, think about how much time you can commit a day, but out of an abundance of caution, I'd probably kick it out a minimum of 4 to 8 weeks. I'd kick it down the road a month or two, depending on how close I was. You're going to know what your progress is week to week. So I want to talk about a few learning techniques that should be helpful to everyone here. And we're going to get a bit outside the norm, but not too far. When you go out and you read people's exam experience, they all mention, get sleep the night before, eat right, do your exercise, etc. Yes, of course. I myself, I eat right, I exercise every day of my life. I get good sleep, I do all of those things. Life is easier if you take care of yourself, right? But let's go a bit deeper there. So, multisensory learning. So, mixed media has proven to be good for everybody. And we'll talk about the common tools and the common tools out there, from video to books to quizzes to flashcards, etc., and how you can mix those up so you can look at the same topic from different perspectives. Because the fact of the matter is, your brain is going to process it differently based on whether you're listening to a YouTube video or watching a YouTube video or reading a topic in a book. And if you're looking at even the same types of material, but from different people explain topics in different ways. And that's the beauty of gathering an array of learning materials. But you want to mix the learning mediums and find the people and the media that you like. Chunking and structured study can go a long way. So I see folks really try to push themselves, especially when they're getting down to that scheduled exam day, and they'll push well beyond well beyond what they can study effectively in a day. So Dal mentions here, I've heard mixing the learning mediums could lead to information overload. So it could, but we're going to make sure that we chunk and structure our study. So chunking means you're breaking things down into smaller, manageable sections. And I'll talk to you about how you effectively use media so you don't overload yourself. And at the end of the day, listen to your brain, right? You're going to know when you're feeling overloaded, and that's when we want to take breaks. Use a timer potentially. Schedule regular short breaks. One thing I will do often in my workday is I want to get something done. I'll give myself an hour to do it, and I'll set a timer that goes off at the end of an hour, and then I'm going to get up, stretch my legs, and do something to clear my head. So for me, I like to go out in the garden. I like to do, a few seconds of exercise. I'll knock out a set of pull-ups or push-ups or whatever to get to feeling better, and just to clear my mind. You can use apps. There are some apps out there we'll talk about. There's a bit of gamification in the learning platforms these days. Not a great deal, frankly, but that does help if you can gamify it. I do strongly suggest noise management. At the end of the day, if you've got some noise canceling headphones, those can be really helpful. Or I say soft background music here. What I like is you can use white, brown, or pink noise. I prefer brown noise, but if you just go out to YouTube, I'd say start with white noise and brown noise and listen to those. They're somewhat similar, but you can just put some noise on in the background that just kind of takes some of the other ambient noise in your environment off your mind. But getting yourself into a quiet space where you can focus and you're not distracted by spouses, children, and pets is going to be a good thing. When you can focus, you're going to be more effective. I like the idea of study companions as well. So you can certainly go out to Reddit, although I'd say do so with caution. Reddit's a little rough. I have some friends over at the Discord community cybersecurity station. Used to be called certification station. I'm going to just send you an invite here, or share an invite. They'll put the link down here. And bear with me here, just getting back to our session. See if I can get that link copied. Go. All right, this is an invite over to the Discord. I keep an eye on the Discord session over there for my name. I kind of I'm a professor over there, but I let the folks who dedicate their time to helping the community answer questions. And if I feel there's something I need to add to make sure a discussion comes to the right conclusion, I'll chime in. You can certainly at me, do the at Pete, and you'll find me. And I'm quite happy to respond privately or in the forum there if you have a question. But remember, not all advice in forums is going to be great advice. You're going to find folks who will tell you what works for them, and if what works for them doesn't work for you, it's okay. You're special, just like everyone else, and we all have our preferences, and you're going to find them, and that's what you lean into. You take what works for you, put it in that briefcase and take it along, and you take what doesn't, you throw it in the bin and leave it behind. Think about some stress reduction techniques. In particular, when you get to the a certain length of time in a study session, or maybe you're on a topic that you're going to find some domains are easier for you than others. And there's not one domain that I find everybody sees as difficult. It varies by everyone. When you find you're hitting a wall, you're not feeling good, do whatever works for you. You can think about mindfulness exercises, put some music on, take a walk, get an app and play some games on your phone. Like I said, I like to do exercises before and after I tackle challenging concepts. It just kind of gives me a little endorphin rush, and I can use that to my advantage. Um, do I think most of the content in this video would also be useful for the CISM exam? What I'm talking about here will be equally useful for the CISM exam, 100%. Obviously different learning materials, but similar. But yeah, everything we're talking about here applies equally. Personalize the approach and recognize that you are going to build strength over time. Memory is a muscle. You're going to build it up through regular practice. We're going to talk about the techniques here, but just understand you're not going to come out of the gate a thoroughbred, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint. And of course, as I said, eat right, get enough sleep, pace yourself, listen to your body, listen to your mind, and don't stress yourself. At the end of the day, this is an exam. It doesn't define you. It doesn't define your life. There are people in this world who have been wildly successful who didn't pass the CISSP exam. If you pass this exam, which I'm sure you can, it just gives you a leg up. So I want to talk just for a minute about a few techniques that may be especially relevant if you deal with PTSD. And this is a sensitive area. So I want you to take these with a grain of salt. Talk to if you work with a therapist or anything, talk to your therapist. But here are a few things that came out of the Q&A sessions and the collaboration I had. So making sure you have a structured study schedule where you have clear, manageable expectations for yourself can help to reduce the anxiety. And remember, if you miss a session, don't stress, it's still going to be there tomorrow. And remember, if you've got that exam scheduled, you can always punt that ball down the field. $50 at a time, the world is not going to end if you kick that, a couple of months down the road, it's no big deal. Establish an environment that feels comfortable for you, somewhere that's calm, you've got some quiet, good temperature, good lighting, the right equipment, the lack of everything else. We're going to talk about some memory strategies. One that was mentioned in particular when it comes to PTSD is using state-dependent recall technique. So basically, create a study environment that's similar to a test setting. Now, that can be a mixed bag, right? Because you're going to take the CISSP in an exam room, and I'll tell you what I do. I try to schedule my exam early or late in the day, and I try to do it in the middle of the week, like a Tuesday or a Thursday. And I'll talk to my testing center, and I'll say, what are the lowest traffic times of the week? And I'll try to schedule my test when there are as few people around to distract me as possible. But basically what this means is set yourself up with an environment that's quiet, it's free from distractions, so you can focus on what you need to focus on. Because the reality is we have to know of even as a security leader, we have to be familiar with a fair bit of technology. And the CISSP exam, folks say it's a foot deep and a mile wide, and that in some respects is actually true. But if you get in those scenarios where you're just distracted, try just changing the channel. Grab a trivia or a light puzzle on your phone or something during breaks. Just distract yourself. I've got a friend who likes Sudoku. Never been my bag. Works for him though. You know what you like, and you use what works for you. It doesn't matter what works for everybody else. You can certainly take that input from other people. What works for you, throw it in the briefcase and take it along, and what doesn't, throw it in the bin and move on. You're going to have people out there that say, oh, I don't schedule my exam until I know I'm 100% ready. You're going to have others that say, oh, I have to schedule my exam in order to get myself to study. But as I talked about, if you just, set your thinking right, in either case, no matter which way you take it, it's not the end of the world, right? There's no reason that we need to stress about that because we can always reschedule. So thinking about your mindset, I'm going to say one more thing about this, and I just want to share a story with you. So I lived in Oklahoma for more than 20 years, and we were living in effectively right amongst the many Indian nations here in the United States. So the Cherokee Nation, the Creek Nation. And there was a story we all heard a million times. Maybe you've heard this, maybe you've not, but I think this is the perfect story about your mindset. So there was a Cherokee man teaching his grandson about life, and he said, "There's a fight going on inside me." He said, "It's a terrible fight. It's between two wolves." And he said, "One is evil. He's anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego." All of those negative things that we can, fall into a trench and be thinking about ourselves. And he continued though, and he said, "The other wolf is good. He's joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. All things we must have in ourselves." But he added, "The same fight is going on inside you, grandson, and inside every other person as well." And the grandson thought about this for a minute, and then he asked his grandfather a question. He said, "Which wolf will win?" And the old Cherokee simply replied, "The one you feed." We've heard many variations of the story, but how true is that? If we feed all of that negative self-talk, that's the wolf who wins, isn't it? Whether you think you can or you can't, you're absolutely right. And so I just want you to think about how you judge yourself, and that is to say you shouldn't judge yourself. You were put on this earth to advise and to care for others, not to judge. We're all going to face judgment in one way or another someday. We don't need to be the judge. So I want to get into somewhat more technical aspects now of the preparation. And I want to talk about your exam prep strategy. I'm going to extract a couple of topics from my 10 key topics video, but I want to talk about your exam prep strategy. So we're going to start with some fundamentals here, just day one, okay? So you want to chart a course for everything you need to deal with as you're running through all of these techniques. So strategy and time management, fundamental. We have to have a game plan for how we're going to prepare for this exam. What does our schedule look like? How much time are we going to spend per day? And time management goes beyond just how much time we're going to spend per day or per week. And pick the schedule to the degree you can control it. Sometimes if we have a changing work schedule, then commit to a weekly time allotment and spread it out over the days that work for you. Bear in mind that you are going to receive 100 to 150 questions on this exam. It's computer adaptive testing, and it's going to give you just enough questions to figure out if it believes you would pass the exam if you received all those questions. That means, best case, you've got around 105 seconds per question. That's approximate. At the worst case, with 150 questions, you've got about 75 seconds per question. So that's pretty aggressive. So before you go in that exam room, you need to have time management on lock. I am going to share with you a couple of ways you can get that done today in our discussion, because as you are taking your practice quizzes, you want to have at least some of those quizzes where you are practicing the process of running through the questions, even the difficult ones, and getting to an answer in that worst case time frame. So I'm going to give you an easily applicable strategy for answering difficult questions, and then you're going to practice on the time management. A lot of people have different advice on answering questions. I wanted to quantify how you get through it, because you'll see people out there that say, "Oh, read every question 2 times or read every question 3 times." Frankly, I'm not confident that I could read a question 3 times in 75 seconds and still have time to answer the thing. So I don't think that's necessarily the best way. So we'll dig into that. And there are some foundational topics and principles, things like encryption, the secure data lifecycle, management and incident response, the quantitative risk analysis formulas, all foundational things that are going to come up in more advanced questions. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about the foundation, because the fact of the matter is the advanced topics and the advanced questions assume you have a foundation, that you understand the basics of encryption, that you know the difference between symmetric and asymmetric encryption. You know how hash functions are different than encryption. You know a bit about digital signatures. You know the 5 pillars. And there are many topics you may only see once or twice. The fact of the matter is, my friends, you are going to study hundreds of topics, and you're only going to get 100 to 150 questions. But you're only going to see most topics once or twice unless you are unfamiliar with that topic, and then that adaptive engine poke at that weak spot a bit. But again, hundreds of topics, as little as 100 questions, so do not be upset if you only see one question on a topic that you spent a lot of time preparing for. It simply means you probably got a difficult question, you knew the answer, and so the adaptive testing engine moved on. Good for you. It's not a loss, it's a win. And finally, there is the mindset. You've no doubt heard think like a manager more than once at this point if you've been studying for any length of time. And the security leader mindset is what defines your role. So we have to bear that in mind as we are answering questions. But you want to build your plan, work the plan, know your readiness, schedule and pass. When you schedule is up to you. Me personally, I tend to schedule when I think I'm 75, 80% ready. You do what works for you. You can wait until you know you're 100% ready. You can do it when you're getting close. I tend to like to do it when I'm getting close and I know I have time for some of that last minute prep. I have a video out there called 10 Key Topics and Strategies, where I dig into a lot of those foundational elements that I feel are very important for you to know for the exam. So I'm going to give you a link to my 2024 exam playlist here. I put the 10 key topics and strategies at the top. There's no perfect order for these videos. I kind of arranged them in the order I thought made sense. But there's a link to the playlist. You'll get a link as well in the follow-up email. So another area I want to talk about is that mindset, the thinking like a manager. So I want to give you the short version of this, and then I'll give you a spot to get the longer version of this. So you're going to see many sources that say think like a manager when you're answering these questions. So a commonly misunderstood pair of concepts that I see come up in questions as people are preparing for this exam are some of those manager mindset concepts, and those are the related concepts of due diligence and due care. So due diligence, if we go look at the dictionary definition, in one exam prep source, it's actually listed as practicing the activities that maintain the due care effort. That is not my favorite definition of that. Due care is doing what a reasonable person would do. Doing is the key word here. Doing what a reasonable person would do in a given situation. It's sometimes called the prudent man rule or sometimes the prudent person rule. But together, these will reduce senior management's culpability and downstream liability when a loss occurs, when they have done their due diligence and exercised due care. So to unpack that just a bit further. So I like to think of the first pass of due diligence and due care occurring around a decision point. So due diligence tends to happen before that decision. Due diligence will include research and planning and evaluation, largely before the decision. Not entirely, there's a cycle here, but due diligence happens before that big decision. On the due care side, implementation. the operation and maintenance, the upkeep of the solutions we put in place, reasonable measures to address risks. Do care, if I were to simplify it, it's largely the doing after we make that decision. Now, after we make a decision, if I put a firewall in place, for example, there are going to be some periods of due diligence where I need to come back and make sure the solution is still effective, where I'm doing more research, planning, I'm evaluating the results to make sure it still works. There's a cycle there, but this is a simplified way to think about it. And due diligence is going to increase our understanding and helps us reduce risk before we go into the decision. And due care is exercising the actions of a reasonable person, a prudent person is how that's said. Because if an executive at an organization understands that there is a risk that can impact the privacy of their customers, their sensitive data, or heaven forbid, human safety, the executive has a due care obligation to implement reasonable measures. And if they do not, they can be found in violation of that due care. They can be found negligent. So we evaluate and then we execute. So if I think about it another way, I want to give you just another technique to remember these two. So due diligence, I'd say think before you act. So we're doing the evaluation, the planning. And due care is about action. Actions speak louder than words. If you want a mnemonic, a memory device, do detect. So I'm detecting the important aspects that influence my decision. And then through due care, I am correcting the risk condition. And you notice that do detect, due diligence, do correct, due care. Just another way to think about that. I find folks repeatedly struggle with this topic. So I want to just throw a couple of examples here, and then we're going to go through a practice question to see what you think. So examples of due diligence, basically knowledge and research of laws and regulations, industry standards, best practices, doing our homework. And then on the due care side, delivery or execution that would include reporting security and incidents, security awareness training, disabling access in a timely way. Any of these could be considered that. I have a lengthier description of due care in my Last Mile book. If you have it, there's certainly a description of due care and due diligence in the official study guide as well. I honestly like the way I described it in the Last Mile, which includes a clear example. So I want to take you through just a quick sample question here. So which of the following is not an example of due diligence? So when we're reading questions, the first tip I can give you is make sure you know what they are asking you here. And so there's a negative in here, right? Which of the following is not an example of due diligence? So that tells me right away, I'm going to have three options that are due diligence and one is going to be due care. So we said due diligence is due detect, due care is due correct. So I'm going to put the answers on the board here. I want you to tell me which one you think it is as soon as you see it. So which is due care is essentially what they're asking us here. Performing a background check, verifying security practices of a potential vendor. Does that sound like due care to you? It's not. Updating routine firmware to the latest version. So that sounds like doing, right? Amen. And penetration testing, that's more due diligence. That's, trying to poke holes in our security controls. So updating routing firmware to the latest version, that is a clear example of doing, right? We noticed through our due diligence, through our monitoring, that our routing firmware was not up to its latest version, so we exercised due care and implemented a firmware update. That's a fairly simple example, but very relevant. I have a video out there, the long version of this, I'd call it, on mastering the CISSP mindset. As I said, over in the official study guide and in CISSP, the Last Mile, you will also find an explanation of due diligence and due care. So if you've got this book, which incidentally is $10 for a 500-page book, section 135, which comes directly from the exam syllabus, I have a description here of due diligence and due care that I think will land with you, and it explains how they work together. I've got a couple of pages here. I've got video follow-ups, etc. So there's plenty there that I think will ground you in due diligence and due care so you never get them wrong. And that's what I'm concerned about. You don't want to study due diligence and due care until you get them right. You want to study till you never get them wrong. But I've had more than a few people tell me that Think Like a Manager video was important to them. I've had folks that listen to that video on the way to the testing center. You will find other people who have videos on thinking like a manager. I recommend you watch any of them you encounter. Never hurts to take a few minutes and hear another perspective. So let's talk about our strategy from a resources perspective, because we've only got so much time and so much money. So I want to give you some thoughts here on the materials you can use that will maximize your odds of success without breaking the bank. So if you happen across videos that were made for 2021, for the 2021 version of the CISSP exam, the 2021 exam topics 100% apply. 2024 does bring a few new topics, some updated topics, in fact, a handful of updated topics. Some have been elevated to direct mention in the syllabus, which tells me they are more likely to appear on the exam. I don't believe ISC² will take something we were studying in 2021 and then mention it in the syllabus if they didn't feel it was more important. We see some other things that are simply moved around or reworded ever so slightly. Cloud computing is going to factor more prominently in the 2024 exam, of course. And you may ask, how applicable is the 2021 material? I'll tell you. I had a candidate who was studying for the exam, and the day after the 2024 update was published, the official study guide did not exist yet. It was not released from Cybex. He had only studied 2021 materials. He walked in there on the first day of the 2024 exam. He passed at 100 questions, full stop. That's how applicable 2021 exam materials are. I'd still recommend you get the latest version of the official study guide. Use updated materials where you can. But the changes when we look at the syllabus, very small. The domains are the same. Here's the shift in the weighting. It's virtually non-existent. Now, somewhere a few years ago, ISC² changed 2 words in their description of scoring on these domains. And they said basically, you don't need to pass every domain. I will tell you in my experience, I believe it's certainly possible, but I think fairly unlikely to pass if you fail even one domain, because that's going to represent a gap in your knowledge that's potentially very significant, especially if it's foundational material. If you're failing on domains 1 and 2, for example, there's a lot of foundation there that's going to make the rest of this exam very difficult. So let's talk about the resources. So in terms of videos out there on my playlist, I've got the 8-hour video that a lot of people have watched that I created back for the 2021 version of the exam. And then I have a 2024 addendum. You can use these together. In fact, I had originally planned to make a whole new series, but when we saw the syllabus, it was so close to the same, it didn't make sense. So they're minor updates. I cover all of those in the 2024 video that's about 2.5 hours long. So between these two, you've got about 10.5 hours of collective viewing there. And you can, knock it off in pieces. And my playlist, I've tried to arrange the videos you should watch in a rough order that I think you should watch them in. And I'd say everything on my screen there, the first half a dozen videos, I think these are essential. I think everybody should watch them. And then I get into some drill down sessions here where I talk about cyber attacks and countermeasures at length for about 40-45 minutes. I have one dedicated to cryptography. I have one that's just 100 important topics. It's just 4 hours of rapid fire topic coverage. A lot of people like that one. That was a live session a few months ago. So basically start at the top, work your way down, bits and pieces. You don't need to tackle them all at once. But we're seeing those videos work for a lot of folks. You're going to find other people who have videos. There's some content over on LinkedIn, certainly more on YouTube. Use what's available to you, mix and match, and find what you like. That's really what this comes down to. Like I said, um, don't do something just because somebody else says it's the way to do it. Now, the official study guide that comes from Cybex, they're in the 10th edition. It has 1,000+ practice questions, and I prefer the electronic format, and I will tell you why. Now, I do appreciate that some people like a physical book. If you would like a physical book, get the official study guide. Is there a downside? Here's the downside. If you have an electronic version of that book, you can search it, like if you have it on Kindle, you can search it for a word or phrase. If you don't, then you are limited by the references in the index in the back of the book. And if something didn't get indexed, then you're not going to see it. That's why I like electronic. And also then you can take it to multiple devices. It travels easily anywhere you go. My book, on the other hand, is 465 or 70 pages of what I try to make clear, focused explanations. I've laid out my syllabus to follow the numbered exam syllabus precisely. So when you look at my table of contents, it goes chapter 1 is domain 1, chapter 2 is domain 2, and you're going to find the numbers match the numbered syllabus precisely. And I have well over 100 images in there, I think, at last I saw. And I have full color images, and I don't draw a picture unless it means something. So I try to provide pictures that are meaningful and useful. And, for example, when you get into security models, you're going to find security models are a topic that are covered nowhere except the CISSP exam. I tried to create a reference table in that section, and if you could learn this reference table, this would be a huge boost to your ability to answer questions around security models, for example. So somebody shared the landing page over there. I made the book $10 because I want it to be accessible to everybody. It's as simple as that. The publisher said you should be charging $30 for this book, and I said no, I should make this easy for people to buy so they can get the official study guide, because I want you to have that official study guide because it includes 1,000+ questions. They are not exact exam-like questions, but they will help you with your knowledge acquisition to make sure you know how you're feeling about your knowledge around specific domains. So not every practice question is the best question. And so you just don't want to get too wrapped up in it, because for the half hour you can agonize over a terrible question. You could go on and probably have a look at 20 or 30 other questions, and that would be a much better use of your time. So there are 3 resources out there that I'm going to recommend as nice to have if you have a little budget. Pocket Prep, Quantum Exams, and the exam flashcards, which I will tell you are from me, just in the interest of full disclosure. So my group put those together. So I like Pocket Prep because it's good for testing your knowledge and focus on weak areas. They give you flexibility in creating small exams on particular domains, and they're available on your mobile device, so you can pretty easily take practice questions on your phone when you're sitting on the couch, if that's how you want to do it. Now, Quantum Exams is a little newer. They're a good simulation of real exam question format and language, and that is to say, by their own admission, they don't claim to cover every topic on the exam. They claim to give you an exam-like experience and questions that in their wording and difficulty are very similar to the live exam. And I agree with them. I believe they are correct in that. On my playlist, you will find a video called The Ultimate Guide to Answering Difficult Questions. I'm going to take you through my strategy for answering difficult questions here today, and I believe you will find it enlightening. What I did in that video was actually went through my system using 10 questions from Quantum Exams. They did not pay me to do that. I use their questions because I believe them to be that level of quality. My exam flashcards our almost 1,350 flashcards that cover, you can use on any device, and we try to cover every topic on the exam. And I create for you, I'm just going to drill down. When you buy my flashcards, you basically get access to all the exams I cover, but I break them down by domain. But you'll also notice that we break them down by many individual topics. So if you're weak on PKI, you can go look at PKI. If you're weak on network, jump in there. I've tried to do the chunking for you here. So if you have a little budget, these are nice. So Pocket Prep is about $22 a month. Quantum Exams is a one-time fee for a year of access, and they're at about $139 US right now. Um, a little more to the expensive side, but it's quite good. So it's certainly much less than a boot camp. Um, so you will have links to all of these resources in my follow-up email. I'll make sure you've got these. So I want to talk to you about how to use these materials effectively. So we can certainly spend a long time studying, and how long you study really depends on where you are today. And so I think it was Buddha that said there are three things that cannot long remain hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. And the fact of the matter is, whether you are ready for this exam or you are not, the truth is going to come out on exam day. It's important that you know the truth before you walk in that room so you can pass this on the first try. And the key to that is making sure that you know what you don't know. So let's talk about how we do that. Because there is no prize for the longest study time. I tell the story to audiences frequently. I encountered a colleague at a conference where I was speaking. He came up and told me he had just passed the CISSP exam. And he said, "Man, I just passed. I studied for a year and a half." And he said, "I noticed you passed as well." He said, "How long did you study?" And I said, "Well, I'm in a slightly different place than you. I studied for 2 weeks." And me saying that after he'd studied for a year and a half, it just wiped the smile right off his face. He read the official study guide cover to cover. Not the best use of your time for most of us. I have a very close friend in Australia who came to visit my family on the holidays. She did read the official study guide cover to cover, passed the first time. She's one of very few people I've known to do that. So let's talk about the 80-20 process, what's called the Pareto principle. So think of exam prep as a way to funnel your efforts. So at the top of the funnel, we have all exam content and study materials, all topics that you need to study in all domains. What you want to do is to funnel down to what you need to focus on. You're going to do that through mixing these materials. You're going to use videos and the books and practice exams and live review. Like there's a PDF for every one of my videos out there. If you don't like flashcards, what I did when I prepared, I couldn't find flashcards, so I actually made my own PDF of my own PowerPoint and gave it to my lovely wife and said, "Quiz me if you would, please." And so I had live review with a partner. If you have a study partner, great way to do it because they can ask you questions different ways to test your mastery of a topic. You want to spend the bulk of your time down here on your weak areas. And that's going to be important, that if you want to get ready in a shorter amount of time, spend more time on what you don't know. Now, you do need to come back and just touch the topics you're more familiar with. It's easiest to do that in practice quizzes, I think. And that's where the power of repetition comes into play, making sure that we touch on topics and see how our recall is over time. It's called spaced repetition. And if we think about it this way, when I study a topic, after that first session, I'm going to forget a certain amount of that content over time. And the longer I step away from it, the more content I am likely to forget. Now, when I come back and touch that content again, I'm likely going to remember some, and I'm going to remember a bit more. And each time I come back, what I'm going to find is that I will tend, on the average, to remember a little more and to remember it for a little longer. That's spaced repetition. So how long does it take to memorize anything? So it's good to have your eyes open on this. And this is basically for most people, okay? So if you wanted to memorize something quickly, what you can do is a number of repetitions in rapid succession. So I can repeat in a few minutes, a few hours, a couple of days. You want to know why boot camps work? You can basically go look at spaced repetition on this schedule. A boot camp is generally taught by very smart people who take you through a lot of content, and they use spaced repetition and other techniques to make sure that this information sits in your short-term memory bank. I'm here to tell you boot camps definitely work. They're just really expensive, right? So boot camps tend to be $2,500, $3,000 US. It's a lot of money. If you want to memorize something for a longer period of time, you need to space some of those repetitions out. So where we're going in with just a few hours to a couple of days on the short term, if we want to commit this to the long term, I want to stretch this out. So if I decide on day one that I've got domain one down cold, I'm going to leave it and I'm going to come back to it and maybe do a practice quiz in a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, just to see if I'm still solid, just to refresh my memory and make sure it's still there. I just want to hang on. Now, I want to talk about a memory device that I think is fairly important for those of you that say, oh, I struggle to remember things. We all struggle to some degree. So here's one way I've found that helps. It's what we call a mnemonic device or a memory device. It's a technique to make memorizing information easier. And what you're going to find on the CISSP exam, you're a security leader. They expect you have a few years of security experience. So they might drop you into the middle of a process. Maybe it's an incident response scenario, and they assume that you know that process, that you know where you are. You know what the step was right before, you know what the step is right after. What's the next thing you need to do? They're not looking for rote memorization. They're looking for you to have a real world understanding of these. So a common technique we use is the expression mnemonic, what we call an acronym, or a first letter mnemonic. And the best mnemonic devices, the best memory devices are simple, they're relevant, they're visual, they might be funny, but they're easy to remember. I like the first letter mnemonic as a way to remember lengthy processes. So for example, the OSI model. One of the first acronyms I learned was when I was studying for the MCSE exam, which dates me a bit. I was studying for the MCSE at the end of its life. We have the 7 layers of the OSI model, from layer 1, the physical, up to layer 7, the application. There's an expectation that you know the OSI model and you know the function that's happening at each layer, and you know the TCP model equivalent. So these memory devices, going from the bottom up, here's a first letter mnemonic. Please do not throw sausage pizza away. And then going down from 7 to 1, all people seem to need data processing. Those were the 2 versions that my professor taught me in junior college as part of the first MCSE class that studied at that junior college. She gave us these 2 memory devices. I remembered them, and I've never forgotten them, frankly. So you'll also be expected to know what happens at each layer. So I like to think about the protocols that happen at each layer. Getting into some of my longer videos, we'll actually compare the OSI model alongside the TCP/IP model to understand the equivalencies. Another area is the incident management framework. So the CISSP exam has an incident management framework, a process that's different than anything I've seen anywhere else. It's just a little bit different, but if you know it, it's very logical. So here is their 7-phase incident management framework, from detection through response, mitigation, reporting, recovery, remediation, and lessons learned. I like drum roll as my mnemonic to remember this. That's how I did it. I went some years ago and found that animated GIF to help lock it in your brain. I have a PDF where I have explained the incident management framework, how it is different than others, what happens at each phase, etc. It is covered extensively in my book, but I have a PDF where I've explained it for free with page references in the official study guide. I'll make sure to include the link in the follow-up email. I don't recommend this video often, but it's out there on the playlist. I have a video out there on memorization tips. So it's worth looking at if you want to just refresh on some of these strategies that I've talked about here. So I want to talk about the multi-sensory learning techniques, the using multiple sources. So somebody said, I've heard that if I use multiple sources, I can become overloaded. That's true. You can, right? We can basically weigh ourselves down with what I call the paradox of choice. When I go into the supermarket, I can probably find 18 flavors of grape jam on the shelf. It's potentially going to be tough for me to find one that works. So fortunately, in the world of the CISSP exam, one of the most requested security exams on job listings anywhere, many people before you have taken this exam, and they can tell you what worked for them. They can point you to materials. If you go over to that Discord, you will get opinions from all sorts of people. Take them with a grain of salt, look at the materials that work for you, that fit within your budget, and work from there. I tend to think starting with the official study guide is a safe bet, and you'll see why in just a moment. I'm going to explain to you how you can use these sources effectively. So how do we identify the most likely exam topics? That's important, right? Because there are hundreds of topics, but there are only 100 to 150 questions, right? Well, what if I told you there's a way to spot the high probability topics? Well, there is. So when I go to that official study guide, early in that guide, you will find the chapter to domain mappings. I have simplified those for you here. They are in a table here. So for example, look at domains 3 and 4. So domain 3 is covered in chapters 6 through 10. Domain 4 is covered in chapters 11 and 12. Domain 7 is covered in chapters 16 through 19. So keep a mapping of domains to book chapters on hand so you can reference those. So if you want to focus on on domain 3, you can go look at chapters 6 through 10. Now, if I'm focused on domain 3, for example, what I can do is go to the end of chapters 6 through 10, and you're going to find something. You're going to find a section called Exam Essentials. It's at the end of every chapter, and it recaps likely exam topics. This is giving you a hint as to the topics that are likely to appear on the exam from that domain, from that chapter. And you will find that for every chapter in the official study guide from Cybex. One of the reasons that I recommend everybody use that book. But research shows that we all benefit from a variety of sources. What you have to do is mix and match these and find what you like, what feels right for you. So I'm going to tell you the way I do it. I'm going to give you my preferred order. You can use this. If it doesn't work for you, throw it in the bin. I like to start with video content, and I'll go out to YouTube and I'll get a video. I try to get a short video to start. I don't want to start with a 12-hour video, or I'll go watch, an hour of a video like domain 1. I can go watch a few minutes somewhere and see how I'm doing on domain 1. And on YouTube, you can control the video speed, right? So like my videos, I talk at about 125, 130 words a minute on purpose because not everybody speaks English as their first language. The good news is if you do, you can crank my videos up to about 1.5 and you're safely going to understand every word I say. I'll look at the PowerPoints. So I put the PowerPoints out there in PDF format so you can flip through them if you like. Live quiz with that PDF if you have a partner, or flashcards as a way to help. The course PDFs, like I say, can be a good substitute for flashcards if you have somebody who can help you there. Practice exams are great as a checkpoint to gauge your knowledge. Now, I want to warn you, you want to practice time management in these sessions to make sure that you are ready for the limitations, the constraints that will be placed on you on exam day. And then there's targeted reading. So I like targeted reading of the official study guide largely for closing my knowledge gaps. It's not a great cover-to-cover read. I don't think you're going to find anybody who says the official study guide was a compelling read. It was much better than Moby Dick. I'd read it again and again. No, nobody says that. It's a perfectly good book, suitable for its purpose. It's not meant to be entertaining, it's meant to be informative. But multiple resources of each type are a fine idea. You can bounce between options that work for you. So I want to talk to you for a minute about how to use the practice quizzes to assess your exam readiness. So whether you're using the questions from the official study guide, which we're going to look at in just a second, or you're using something like Pocket Prep or Quantum Exams, what you can do with all of these is practice your time management. Okay. So I want to, and before we go over and look at the official study guide, I want to give you one additional resource, and then we're going to go look at both of them. So on exam day, when you walk in that room, time management needs to be second nature to you, because the fact of the matter is you're going to have 75 to 105 seconds per question or somewhere in between, depending on if you pass at 100 questions or 150 questions or somewhere in between. I've had folks report that they passed at 105, 110, 125. It can tap you out at any point when it believes you have cleared the bar. There are some free timers available to help with your time management. The one I like best is the intervaltimer.com. There's another one that's an exercise timer that's pretty good in the computer format. It's not so good in the mobile device format. So I'm just going to flip over here with you. So the interval timer is this one right here. Whoops, sorry, where'd it go? So with the interval timer here, you can do a few things. So I can set the amount of time that I want to study for. So I can set my work time. So for example, if I'm looking at exam day worst case, I can set this to 75 seconds. It really doesn't want me to do that. I can crank that up to 75 seconds. I can basically set my rest time to zero or pretty close. I can set how many rounds I want to do this. So let's say I want to go 20 rounds, 20 questions. I pick how many questions I'm going to do, and I use this timer on my second screen to just tell me what I'm doing here. So I can basically configure this to be a decent 20 question, 75 second per question timer. You can go into the settings and turn sound on or off. So you can turn the sound effects and the voice guidance off and just use a screen flash, which I find less distracting, frankly. So poke around, find a timer that works for you, and use a timer on a second screen as one way to manage your time. I don't find any of the resources that are out there right now do a perfect job on the time management, simply because they tend to give you time management in exam mode. So like if I take a practice exam in exam mode, they'll give me 3 hours and 100 questions, which is fine. But if I want to practice, 75 seconds or 105 seconds a question, maybe I want to start at 2 minutes and work my way down. You can absolutely do that. Remember, walk before you run. Maybe give yourself 2 minutes a question to start and work your way down to that exam day pace. But put a timer on a second screen on your phone or whatever, then go to the online test bank. So here's the official study guide assessment exam. So they have one assessment test that's 40 questions. And when you take their assessment, you'll see it shows you the overall time you spent. It doesn't give you time per question. It's not counting down. It's truly for practice. So it's not doing a lot for time management, at least not in a very structured way. Each chapter in that book has 20 questions. So remember I said that, for example, Domain 3 is covered in chapters 6 through 10. So if you look at that, you've got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, you've got 5 chapters times 20 questions. You've got 100 questions there. So you could go in, take 20 questions on chapter 6 and work your way down through these over a period of days to master Domain 3, for example. And when you get closer to exam day, they do have some practice exams. So you'll see they have 4 exams of 125 questions. So they're kind of landing you right in the middle. In my experience, in my opinion, these questions tend to be a little more knowledge focused. They're a little more focused on the technologies and the scenarios. They're not a great simulation of exam day language complexity. If you understand if you have the knowledge and you understand the English language pretty well, because they can get a little tricky with language on the exam, you're going to be in good shape. The quantum exams, if you've got the budget for that sort of thing, they do a good job of showing you questions that are pretty darn difficult. Even if you don't have the budget for the quantum exams, go watch my ultimate guide to answering difficult questions. I cover some quantum exams questions in there, and what I will tell you is most people that watch that video don't get more than 2 to 4 of the 10 right. Um, I but what I will tell you is if you get them wrong, you need to go back and watch that section again and understand why you got it wrong, because those came straight from the source. I agree with the reasoning behind every one of them. If you got it wrong, you definitely got it wrong. And I do find folks struggle with that a bit. So having good sources, you've got some options out there. So I want to talk to you about what I call the read strategy. But before we get into it, I want to give you about a 5-minute break here. So we're going to pause for about 5 minutes. It's 5 after the hour. We're going to pick up at about 10 or 11 after the hour. Okay. So get a coffee, take a bio break. We're going to come back and we're going to walk through a strategy for answering difficult questions. I'm going to take you through a few difficult questions, and I'll take your questions and feedback along the way, and we're going to get you closer to feeling like you're ready for exam day. We'll wrap up with some Q&A and next steps. So I'll see you in 5. All right, my friends, we're at 11 after the hour, so I'm going to get this show on the road. So we're going to talk through the read strategy. This is a repeatable strategy I developed to help you navigate difficult questions on the exam in the time that you're allotted. So we know there can be some time pressures. So this will help you deal with that while getting to the point quickly. So READ is a mnemonic. It stands for review, eliminate, analyze, and decide. It's intended to be easy to remember. If you will practice this as you take your practice quizzes, you will master this long before exam day. And to answer your question, Arturo, yes, this will be on YouTube, absolutely. So if you need to duck out at any point, my friends, please do so. So let's start with review. The goal of any question is to find the core issue that you're solving for. So you want to read through the details of what's being asked. What are the requirements? Try to extract the chief objective of the question, and if there's any context around it. Context such as I'm dealing with a customer in the EU, which tells me I'm dealing with someone where GDPR regulations apply. Is there a specific framework being referenced? Which leg of the CIA triad does the question speak to? Are we talking about encryption, which would mean confidentiality? Are we talking about making sure that a message doesn't get modified, which is integrity? Then we want to eliminate the answers that are definitely not correct. What I do find is that with most questions, both in practice quizzes and the real exam, we can usually throw out one or two answers right away. And we want to take the unimportant details, the distractors, out of the questions as well. But get rid of the wrong answers. And imagine, though, that if you eliminate 2 of 4 answers, even if you don't 100% know the final answer, you're now making your best guess from 2 options instead of 4. You just doubled your odds that you're going to get the right answer. Then we want to analyze our options here. We want to prioritize the solution requirements based on context. Identify all the requirements. There may be one requirement, but you might have a scenario with multiple requirements, at which point you need to prioritize those requirements. So tips for prioritization. Remember your priorities as a chief information security officer, as a security leader. Your number one priority, is human safety. Keep the business running securely, managing risk while exercising due diligence and due care. Remember, as a leader, calling an outside expert is an option, and don't be afraid to do so where the circumstances dictate that you don't have those capabilities in-house. And then when you've whittled down your way down to the core ask within the question and the answers that you believe are possible, you want to pick the best answer based on evaluating each answer on its own, identify what you do and don't like about each. Since you're really a big picture thinker as a business leader, as a security leader, look for that option that maybe encompasses all the others. Be wary, be suspicious of answers that call for a technical hands-on response. If the first step, if the answer says the first step is basically shut the server off, which disrupts service to customers, I'm going to be pretty wary of that answer. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't mean you're never going to see a technical answer, but on the whole, I'm going to take a good people or process focused answer over a technical hands-on response on the whole. Regulatory requirements override company policies. Remember, regulations are legal requirements, right? Company policies are important, but they don't override the law. So here's a quick reference of the read strategy. I'll share a one-page PDF I've got that you can keep on a second screen if you want as well. So review. What are we being asked? What's the goal we're solving for? Look for the processes or the frameworks or regulatory requirements that would influence our next move. Eliminate. Get rid of the unimportant details in the questions, the answers that are definitely wrong. We're going to walk through a few questions here and get both of these steps right. We're going to review and see what they're really asking us. We're going to eliminate the definitely wrong answers. You're going to answer questions for me as we go along. Then we analyze our answers. What are the solution requirements? If we've got multiple, prioritize the solutions, remembering our priorities as a leader. Human safety, always number one. And then I pick the answer I like best. I evaluate what's left, and you evaluate each answer on its own. It's very important that we don't invent elements of the situation. We don't invent circumstances that aren't explicitly called out in the question. But know your role, remember your priorities, choose your answer. But just get this process down to where it becomes second nature. And I've had quite a few people that have said they were able to do so. Now, I want to give you I call them my top 10 decision criteria. So when you're choosing an answer, remember to look for answers that meet your CISO priorities. Look for answers that meet all the solution requirements. And if you have answers where you have two answers that meet all the requirements, look for one answer that you can explain objectively has advantages over other solutions, because maybe two things solve the problem, but one does so more effectively because it's less effort, less expensive, more effective. If you've got solid reasoning, you can filter down to the right one from two plausible candidates. And when no answer meets all requirements, look for the answer that meets the highest priority requirement. It's going to be pretty rare that you'll pick a solution that solves a technical problem at the cost of someone's life, because human safety is always number one, right? I tend to say favor those all-encompassing answers where I maybe have one answer that encompasses another. Beware of those technical hands-on solutions. Look for answers that are role appropriate for the party tasked with the solution. Now, this does require a real world lens sometimes. So, for example, I've seen folks when they see an answer that says, set up a password policy, they see the word policy and they think, oh, that means a paper policy that explains password requirements. No, in those questions, usually a password policy is talking about going in somewhere like Active Directory or Entra or Duo, some identity provider, and configuring a technical password policy. So you have to have that right perspective. What is the focus of the question in the CIA triad? Do you see that they're asking you to protect confidentiality, integrity, or availability? So, for example, if they said we're protecting confidentiality and I saw one of my potential answers was hashing, hashing is something we use for integrity. I can use a file hash to make sure that the file's intact before, after transmission. That's an integrity operation. It's not confidentiality, so I could pitch that out. Which answer is scoped and tailored to the organization based on needs, risk appetite, cost effectiveness? Is it a security control that is cost effective? And again, be wary of answers that solve for all or every situation. They are presented as this, basically magic solution that's going to solve for all situations. It's pretty rare that we're going to find one solution that fits all scenarios. We want some room for tuning or tailoring from a baseline. Let me give you a couple of simple bits of advice here at the end before we look at some questions. Just answer the question with the facts you're given. Pay attention to the words. Out there on my guide to answering difficult questions, where I walk you through the read strategy with some of those very difficult questions from quantum exams, I have folks that want to watch that video and they're convinced that I've got the wrong answer there from quantum and they're right, and they want to debate, and I debate them every time, and they are wrong 100% of the time. I'm happy to use that as a proving ground as you're going through your questions to help hone your thinking and your mastery of the process. But don't assume or invent additional scenario context. I see that as a very common problem. People will read the scenario and say, well, of course, they would have already done this thing or that thing or the other thing. No, you're making assumptions there. If the question didn't tell you that certain facts were true, don't assume they are true. As other people might say it, just answer the question, but answer it with the facts you're given. All right. So we're going to go through an exercise here. Take a screenshot if you want this where you can see it. I'm going to take you through a number of questions with the remainder of our time here. I'll save a little bit for Q&A at the end. But we're going to walk through some questions. I'm going to give you time to answer. We're going to knock out some wrong answers together, and then we'll get to that right answer. So you're going to get a little bit of practice. So here we go. So Rico has a chain of sandwich shops. He wants to provide secure free wireless for his customers. Which option best meets the need without requiring users to have an account? So I can see here I need to pick the option that works best that also does not require users to have an account. The ask is pretty simple there. I don't need to read that question 3 times to know what they're asking. I just have to pay attention to exactly what they're asking. They give me a couple of options. A captive portal, WPA in SAE mode, that's simultaneous authentication of equals. PA2 in PSK mode, that's pre-shared key mode. Or WPA2 in enterprise mode. So maybe you're not well versed in wireless security. So what you can see here is that with an exam like the CISSP, we do have to make those leadership decisions which require us to have a focus on the business priorities. But also there's some technical knowledge assumed here, right? So there are a couple of answers I can knock out here. And so even if you knew nothing at all about wireless security, I can tell you why I would knock these out. So Rico is a chain of sandwich shops, okay? And we need to get down to those options that meet the need without requiring users to have an account. So the first one's dead simple. I'm going to knock out captive portal. That's the type of portal you get at Starbucks or you get at the airport, where they ask you to log in with your social media account, and in exchange for sharing your identity, they give you some free internet access. So that's definitely not the answer. The other one, if I didn't know anything about wireless security, I'd knock off number 4 because it says in enterprise mode. Enterprise means large business. Rico's a sandwich shop. He's not an enterprise, so I'm going to just venture a guess that enterprise mode is not the answer. So I'm already down to 2 options. So is it WPA3 in SAE mode or WPA2 in pre-shared key mode? I'll give you a few seconds. Option 2 or 3. Put your answer in the comments if you like. Tell me what you think. We got a 3. Not everybody all at once. A lot of 3s. There's a couple of 2s. And here we go. The answer is WPA in SAE mode. So both of these meet the need for secure wireless without the need for user accounts. The pre-shared key makes WPA2 less convenient. So we had two answers that met the technical requirement, but WPA3 has an objective advantage. And at this point, if you're taking a practice quiz and you get a question like this and you don't know exactly why one is more convenient than the other, flip to that section of the official study guide, the book, whatever, and read on that topic. Bridge the gap. And WPA3, yes, by virtue of the later technology, absolutely more secure. All right, another one. Acme has implemented multi-factor authentication using SMS as a second factor. What is the primary security concern with this design? So I'm always watching for words like first, next, or primary, which tells me primary is another way of saying what is the first, most important, most significant security concern with this design. 1, SMS messages may be stored on the receiving phone. Well, that is a fact. SMS messages are stored on a phone. SMS messages can be sent to more than one device. That is also true. 3, SMS messages are not encrypted. Also true. We have 3 plausible answers here. And number 4, SMS messages can be spoofed by senders. We have 4 answers here, 4 potential answers, all of which are technically true. So let's talk about which of these is the greatest concern. Let's start by knocking out those that are not the greatest concern. So number 1, SMS messages are stored on the receiving phone. Fact of the matter is, I'm willing to take that punch. Yeah, every SMS message I get is on my phone. There's not much of a second option there. When I think about that second factor authentication, I'm getting a code on my phone. I'm also not super concerned that it's being sent to more than one device. The identity platforms we're dealing with in this world, whether they're social identities or they're cloud providers like Microsoft's Entra, Cisco's Duo, Okta, OneLogin, they're not going to accidentally send my code to more than one device. I can knock those 2 off here right away. I'm now down to 2 options. So it's either 3 or 4. Give me your answer. I see some 4s. I see some 3s. All right. The answer is 3. SMS messages are not encrypted, so they could be sniffed and captured. Now, SMS messages can be spoofed. That's not a primary concern in a multi-factor authentication case, that somebody's sending me a dummy code, which would arguably not work, right? That's a pretty weird edge case. So an unencrypted message that could be sniffed while I'm sitting in Starbucks would probably be the main thing we'd be worried about there. All right. Number 3. Greg has been tasked with identifying areas the corporate wireless network isn't available or is available where it shouldn't be. Let me read that again. I didn't get it right. Greg has been tasked with identifying areas the corporate wireless network is available where it should not be available. What is the best method to identify problem areas? Is it 1, war driving, 2, a site survey, 3, war walking? So all of these can be used to identify problem areas. 4, a network design diagram. So we've got 4 answers here that can help us in solving this problem. And really, the key scenario here is we don't want the wireless network. Let's talk about wireless on our corporate campus. I want wireless available in my building, and I may not even want it available in my parking lot, because then somebody could potentially drive up in my parking lot and try to hack my wireless network. I'm not a fan of that. So I'm going to make sure that my wireless is available where it should be, but doesn't extend out beyond those boundaries. So there are a couple of options here that clearly don't present the best solution. So if I were eliminating, I'm going to take war driving right off the list. The primary scenario for war driving is a bit dated at this point. It's where bad actors would drive, down the street or around and basically try to find open wireless networks. And similar to war driving, or is war walking, which is basically just a slower version of war driving. Now that could potentially be effective on a campus if somebody were to walk on my campus. It's probably not the most effective way to do it, though. These are both processes that are used primarily to locate wireless networks. They're not typically as detailed or as thorough as our final answer. So it's either 2, a site survey, or 4, a network design diagram. I see a lot of 2s. Any 4s out there? A lot of 2s. I think we're united on this one. The answer is definitely a site survey. This meets the need through physical, real-world validation, demonstrating due care in our response. Now, a network diagram might be where we start. We might pull up the network diagram on our screen so we can see where we need to travel in our site survey to validate our coverage. War driving and war walking, again, can indirectly expose the issue, but they're not primarily intended for this purpose. So the option provides certainty through due care, and it's well suited. It's appropriate to the use case. All right. So question number 4. So Contoso has offices with networks across the city and want all locations to appear like a single network. Which option would best achieve this goal? Is it an SD-WAN, a VXLAN, FCOE, which is fiber channel over Ethernet, or a VLAN? So this is another one of those scenarios where the fact that we're expected to have some knowledge, some technical knowledge, is front and center. I have to fundamentally be able to describe each of these to have a clue. However, I can take some cues from my question simply by paying attention to what they're asking me here. So it says, Contoso has offices with networks across the city, not across the country, not in multiple states, across the city. That means the metropolitan area network. That means the metro area. So if I'm in Houston, it means metro area. So I'm going to take SD-WAN off because that's what I'm using for long-range connectivity. I'll do SD-WAN between corporate offices across the country, around the world. I'll use potentially WAN technologies for my hybrid cloud. The other one I can take off here just by virtue of the use case. I can knock fiber channel over Ethernet off the list. That's a storage protocol. That's a storage protocol we're running over IP, which leaves us VXLAN and VLAN. So which of these is going to be best? Either can work. Which is going to be the most effective? I got a lot of 2s here. Do I have any 4s? We got a lot of 2s. I think we are mostly united on 2, which is not usually the case. Good on you. So the answer is VXLAN. So the VXLAN is an encapsulation protocol. It carries VLANs across routable networks. It gives the appearance of a single network across distance without the need for physical network changes. So therefore, it's going to be easier for us to implement on the whole. As I mentioned, fiber channel over Ethernet storage related. SD-WAN is going to be for wide area networks, so not quite as well suited to the use case. For this scenario, VLAN achieves it with least complexity, least effort, least disruption, so it has objective advantages over the other options. So as I mentioned, you can walk through the read strategy at a bit more verbose length in the Ultimate Guide to Answering Difficult Questions. You can read the comments out there where other people are quite certain that they have a question right and we've got it wrong, meaning me and the quantum folks. I encourage you to read the comments. I do my best to answer every comment out there and explain why the answer that's in there is correct. So, if you come out there, be nice. I had somebody come out the other day and said, the answer to question 2 is bogus or something of that nature. And alas, it is not. In fact, if you get into this video, it's right at an hour long. It goes through 10 questions, but we go through some very difficult questions, and I give you time to answer these questions. But what I will tell you is I don't think I've had anybody get more than maybe 4 out of 10 correct on their first pass. So it is legitimately a very difficult exam. So do bear that in mind. So in recent weeks, I have put a video out here called the 10 Key Topics and Strategy. So there is a little bit of overlap in terms of exam preparation strategy, but there's a fair bit of technical coverage that we didn't dig into in this session just for lack of time. So that video covers 10 strategies. I'm just going to throw them on the screen here. I can get to the question. So here's the 10 key topics out there. So what you can take away from this are some foundational topics that are important for you to understand. So the secure data lifecycle, for example, number 3, absolutely a foundational topic that if you understand the secure data lifecycle, it's going to help you with a broad range of questions. And when I say understanding the secure data lifecycle, I'm not at all talking about memorizing the phases in the life cycle. I'm talking about functionally picturing how that life cycle works. So I want to take you through another learning technique by talking you through the secure data life cycle. And I want to give you a learning strategy here for how you can better grasp these technologies by picturing the use case. So I'm going to talk you through the Cloud Security Alliance's secure data lifecycle. So it starts with creating the data. So a data can be created by a user. So a user creates a Word document, an Excel spreadsheet, maybe throws some sensitive information in there. Systems, applications can create data too, right? A system is going to log access. Applications create log entries. So it's important that data is handled properly, which means that as soon as that data is created and we're storing it, we need to classify it as soon as possible. And ideally, data is going to be encrypted at rest. We're encrypting data at rest if we're doing it right. And we need to do it as quickly as possible. But it is a fact that I can't truly know that I'm protecting my data as securely as I need to be if I haven't classified it yet, if I haven't basically established how sensitive it is. Data should be protected by adequate security controls based on that classification. And when we get into sharing that data, when we're transferring data across the network in transit, ideally we are encrypting that data in transit. So a common way we do that would be with transport layer security, TLS. Common with VPNs as well. Sometimes we have to archive data for a period of time to comply with laws or regulations that tell us we must retain data for a certain period of time. So I can think about a scenario where maybe my company is subject to Sarbanes-Oxley regulations because we're a publicly traded company. There are certain records that we must retain for 7 years under Sarbanes-Oxley. So I know I have an archival need there. And when I'm archiving data, I may have multiple requirements, right? My corporate policy may say 5 years. Sarbanes-Oxley says 7 years. So I would need to archive that data for the longer of the two requirements. Well, what if my corporate requirement was 10 years and Sarbanes-Oxley is 7 years? If corporate policy is 10 years, Sarbanes is 7 years, I'm going to pick the longer of the two, and that's how long I'm going to archive it for. I'm always going to pick the longer of the two that have policy that apply to me. Now, when we're done with that data, when we hit that archival date, the day after we are no longer required to archive it, we need to get rid of it. So it is neither readable nor recoverable, even through forensic techniques. That's where something like crypto shredding would happen. And the fact of the matter is, data that we retain longer than necessary increases our risk. So data that we have destroyed when it's no longer needed is data that cannot not be accidentally leaked by our user. It cannot be exfiltrated by an effective attacker. So we could look at secure data in another way, and I'm going to give you what I call a functional lifecycle. So you saw I was kind of walking through some use cases there, right? That's how you want to understand data security. And when you get into the technologies around data security, you'll be looking at the Cloud Access Security Broker, the CISSP. You'll be looking at data loss prevention, DLP. You'll want to understand the use case and how those work a little bit in the real world so you get a good picture of that. I try to help wherever I can as I'm explaining those. So if I were to look at data, the data lifecycle from a functional perspective, I create the data, I classify it as soon as I can. Now, the classification of a document can change over time, right? Because I can update a Word document and maybe what's one classification today becomes a different classification tomorrow. If I've got something that's, maybe a less sensitive classification and I add a social security number or a credit card number to it, it's now very sensitive. It's now confidential. If I add intellectual property to it or trade secrets, it's now very restricted. I'm going to store that data, always encrypted, which means I need to have an encryption technique that protects my data at rest. So we'll get into those in the longer videos you'll watch. When it comes to a database, I'm going to use transparent encryption where I'm encrypting the data in the database. On a Windows system or a Linux system, I might use full disk encryption. That's going to be BitLocker on Windows, dmcrypt on Linux. When I'm using the data, I'm going to make sure that it is encrypted in transit. That's where I may be using a TLS encryption scenario, like with a website, or I'm using a VPN tunnel when I'm working from home. I archive the data when I'm not actively using it, but I need to retain it for whatever regulatory or corporate policy tells me I must, and then I will destroy that data so it is not recoverable when it is no longer needed. Data I do not have is data that cannot be leaked or stolen or produced in a legal proceeding. Now, I wanted to cover a couple of the most important of these 10 key topics just while I had you here because we've got a little bit of time. I left a little bit of room here so I could touch on at least a couple of these. I want to talk to you about incident management because this is another one where folks run into some challenges. Okay, so incident management is a bit unique on the CISSP exam because it is a little different than the common frameworks that are out there. So I'm going to show you the 7 phases of the incident management process as it is represented on the CISSP exam. What you see on the official study guide right there, that's what you need to know for this exam. It's a little different than SANS. It's a little different than NIST, which I've listed here. I have a PDF where I describe these steps in depth. I'm going to give you the quick version right here, but I'll give you the PDF so you can read through those. They're in the book as well. All the books cover them. So remember we talked about drumroll: detection, response, mitigation, reporting, recovery, remediation, and lessons learned. So let's talk about what happens at each of those phases. So detection, that's where we're monitoring our environment and we're identifying potential incidents through alerts and reports. So in the response phase, I am activating the incident response team and coordinating the initial response. Mitigation, I'm containing the incident and taking steps to limit its impact. So you've already seen a couple of fancy words here: mitigation and containing or containment. So we need to get into some language. We will. And we'll cover that in just a moment. Not a question, but a comment. Yes, a lot of R's in drum roll for sure. If you roll your R's, if you're a Spanish speaker, it's easier. The reporting phase, this is where we are notifying appropriate parties, internal and external to the organization, depending on the scenario. Recovery, where we're restoring affected systems and services back to normal operations. So now we've got another fancy word here. So mitigation, containment, and recovery are all different types of activities. Then there's remediation. Here's another one: identifying and mitigating vulnerabilities that led to the incident. And then after the fact, lessons learned, documenting the incident and identifying improvements to policies and controls. Now let's unpack what's happening where in this process. So triage is the initial assessment. This is where we're answering the question: is this actually an incident, or is it just an event? Is it just an alert? And if the answer is yes, it is an incident, how severe is it? we'll have some categorizations that in our incident response policy that tell us. So the incident is going to be declared in the detection phase. This is where we say this is in fact an incident and we must respond. Containment and mitigation are about controlling the incident, basically reducing the impact, the blast radius, as some will say, but reducing the impact of the incident. Remediation and eradication are about removing the causes of the incident. So remediation is what you're more likely to hear in the CISSP exam. Eradication is more common, I believe, in the SANS framework, if memory serves. And recovery is about restoring normal operations after the incident, about coming back and returning the environment to its pre-incident state. Because we might be containing an incident, we might be mitigating a threat and running in something other than full and normal environment for a while. But recoveries, we're going to come back and close those gaps and bring the environment back to full normal operation. So there's one more area that I want to touch on with you here, and that is around risk analysis, quantitative risk analysis in particular. And then I'm going to take some questions and we'll talk about next steps here. So quantitative risk analysis includes some formulas. You need to know these formulas, but more importantly, you need to know how to apply these formulas in an example. So again, it helps for us to really learn something by talking through a real world example. So I'm going to take you through an example, albeit fairly simple, but I want to give you just a first taste of these formulas if you haven't seen them already. So risk analysis in the CISSP exam comes in two flavors. There's qualitative and quantitative. Quantitative is the one you're going to see the most often because it assigns its objective. It assigns a dollar value to evaluate the effectiveness of our countermeasures. Qualitative is going to be subjective. It's going to use terms like low, medium, high. There's not a lot of math there. So the formulas that you're going to use and in the order you are going to use them are right here. Exposure factor, single loss expectancy, annual rate of occurrence. Sometimes you'll see it listed as annualized rate of occurrence, but annual rate of occurrence and the annualized loss expectancy. So let's start with the exposure factor. So it represents the percentage of loss that an organization would experience if a specific asset were violated by a realized risk. So it's where a specific asset is being violated by a specific risk. So single loss expectancy represents the cost that's associated with a single risk event that we realize against a specific asset. So where something happens in a specific use case, where we have a threat asset pair that is violated. So let's do some math here. The single loss expectancy is the value of our asset times the exposure factor. So remember, so here's an example. I have an asset that's worth $100,000. My exposure factor is 30%. So if I have an asset that's worth 100 grand and I believe that I'm going to lose 30% of its value in a single event, my single loss expectancy is $30,000. It's basically 30% of the asset's full value. You may be asked in a scenario to answer that question. Now, where it starts to get more interesting is when we add in the annualized rate of occurrence. So this is the expected frequency with which a specific threat or risk will occur within a single year, bearing in mind that the answer may be that it happens less than once a year, which means you're going to have an annualized rate of occurrence of less than 1. And then we have the annualized loss expectancy. This is where we basically take the possible yearly cost of all instances of a specific threat against a specific asset. So I've said a lot here, but we've got these four. So let's just walk through a couple of examples for these two. So the annualized loss expectancy is where I take a single loss expectancy times the number of times it will occur in a year. So for example, let's say I have an office building that's $200,000. Okay, this is a simple example, but if you get it down to understanding this well, you're going to do just fine. I have an office building that's worth $200,000. Hurricane damage estimate is 50%. Okay, so what in the formulas here, what does the office building value of $200,000 represent? Two letters. Asset value. So my asset value is $200,000. They're talking to me about an office building, but what they're really saying is, hey, your asset is worth your asset value is 200,000. The hurricane damage estimate is 50%. So that 50% represents which of these elements? Very good. The exposure factor. So I'm exposed to the tune of about 50% loss every time a hurricane comes through. All right. The probability of a hurricane, our experts estimate, is 1 in every 10 years. So if our annual rate of occurrence is 1, what is the annual rate of occurrence if it's only once in every 10 years? Well, I'm going to divide 1 by 10. My annual rate of occurrence is 0.1. So now I can do some math and get some answers. So let's start with the single loss expectancy. Asset value times exposure factor is our single loss expectancy, $100,000, basically 50% of 200,000, the asset value. Now, we have that annual rate of occurrence, which is once every 10 years. It's 0.1. So with that, we can say that our single loss expectancy of 100,000 times the annual rate of occurrence, which is once every 10 years or 0.1, our annualized loss expectancy is $10,000. So, in this case, if I'm dealing with a hurricane, the most common risk response here is going to be what we call transfer or transference. I'm going to transfer that risk to an insurance company by buying an insurance policy. So if my annual exposure is $10,000 on the whole, my objective is going to be to make sure that my insurance policy does not cost me more than $10,000 a year. That's how I can verify that my safeguard is cost effective. The safeguard evaluation is that we have a security control that mitigates the risk. It's transparent to our users. It's difficult to bypass, and it's cost effective. So I can take my loss expectancy before the safeguard, my loss expectancy after the safeguard, and that's going to tell me the value of the safeguard. That gets me down to what is cost effective. So that's what we're dealing with. And I think the safeguard evaluation is the least likely of the formulas that you're going to see on the exam. But understanding those core 4 that I mentioned, understanding how to apply these 4 to a scenario, it's going to be very important. So I've got a video out there on just the formulas, and that's 35, 45 minutes long if memory serves. So I go through some examples there. I go through examples in a few places. I think the best examples I have are probably in the book even, but you'll find a couple of video sources out there on the playlist where you can go through those specific examples and get familiar with the real world. At the end of the day, they're going to give you scenarios on the exam. They're not going to give you just formula questions asking you to recite a formula. It's just not going to happen that way. They're going to tax you as a security leader. So at the end of it, what you really need to do is get your materials and get started. Even if that means you just get some materials, maybe you just get the official study guide and start watching some videos and doing some quizzes and a little reading. That's what you do. Get started, figure out what you know and what you don't know. It's so important to understand what you do not know so you can begin to funnel out the areas where you're already knowledgeable and get to those things you don't know. So I'll pause right here. Do you have any questions for me before we break? So I hope this has you feeling a little bit better. Maybe you have hope that you've got some strategies here that are going to work. I will share the video recording, so you'll have the replay. You will have the PDF as well, links to all the resources I mentioned. And if anything comes up after we break, when you get that email, you've got a reply button there where you can always get back to me if you need to. But absolutely, don't doubt yourself. If you failed this exam before, I have seen folks pass this exam on their fourth attempt. So wherever you are, you can absolutely pass this on the next attempt. You just need to apply these techniques to make sure you get down to where you are. So getting to that 20% area to focus more out of that 80. So let's talk about that. What I like to do there again is get into some video work, and then I like to map out the quizzes, the chapter assessments in the official study guide. So if I go in here, if I look at those chapter mappings that I put in the PowerPoint, which are also in the book, I can basically figure out which quizzes match which domain. So I'll just show you that chapter mapping right quick. So we'll go back to the PowerPoint here. So here's those chapter mappings. So let's say you want to take a quiz on domain 2, asset security. Domain 2 is covered in chapter 5. So you could basically come right here, go to chapter 5, and you know that you're going to get 20 questions on domain 2. And sure enough, the first question I get is on data, because that domain is asset security and it's data security as well. So information assets is really what they're talking about there on the whole. And remember, we've got that interval timer you can use to try to configure a little, 70-second, 1 minute, 2 minute timer for yourself. Be forgiving as you start. You'll notice that the timer in this engine goes up. It used to be the exam engine here had a different timing mechanism, so you've got to basically create your own so you can begin to get that studying in there and preparation from a time management perspective. So if I go back here again, I'm going to look at the mapping. So I see domain 5 is chapters 13 and 14. I can come back and go to 13 and 14, which covers identity and authentication and controlling and monitoring access. So that's going to be access control and identity. So I've got 20 questions here, 20 questions on the other. That's going to allow me to see where I am. So if I take the quizzes in chapters 13 and 14 for domain 5, if I'm not doing very well, I'm going to take notes and write down where I have not done well, the subjects where I just didn't understand what I was looking at. And then I'm going to go back to the official study guide. I'm going to go look at those, additional resources. I'm going to go do some targeted reading, the one on the left. So I'm always looking to make sure that I mix and match. So maybe I start with the video, I go take a quiz based on the mappings, and I take the questions that I miss, and I go do some targeted reading on my weak areas. But I'm going to use those practice quizzes to get to my weak areas, and that's how I'm going to do it. I like to whittle them down by domain because it allows me to create a more granular target. So drilling down on one domain is easier than drilling down on 8 domains all at once by taking big quizzes. And the other thing, when you're looking at those chapter mappings, because some of these domains are encompassed in multiple chapters, I can get even more granular, because if I'm looking at domain 3, for example, which is covered in chapters 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 5 chapters. What if I do well in 3 of those chapters? That means I've got a more specific target yet that I can go drill down on with some targeted reading. I can do some PDF live quizzing with my study partner, flashcards, whatever, to drill down on those areas. But that's really what this is about. And you're just repeating that cycle on a per domain basis and trying to get down to a more granular target where you know exactly where it is that you struggle. So my friends, with that, we're coming up on the top of the hour. I hope this has been helpful. I'm always available to you, so you can certainly reply on that email. I will give you a link to a form where you can ask me your questions and even attach screenshots if you like to get more specific with your questions to help me understand what you're asking. So I'll look forward to seeing you in some future live event, maybe over in the Discord. And I wish you best of luck on the exam. Until we meet again, take care.